I'm a political analyst in South Africa. And although a lot of the mainstream media in this country don't invite me very often because the views that I speak are not compatible with what I call the master narrative in South Africa, a narrative that despite so-called liberation in this country in 1994 is owned and controlled by white people on land that my forefathers stole 3 centuries ago, was to come uninvited into this place and to steal and plunder from Black people. And although we are now in a so-called democratic South Africa, the economic power remains in the hands of whites. We have terrible xenophobia at the moment, or Afrophobia, where Black brothers and sisters are turning on Black brothers and sisters from the continent as if they are the problem for the deep economic inequality and patterns of Black poverty we see in this country, where in truth the real problem remains white supremacy. So what I write about in my book, and it's been a very popular read for some, but a very unwelcome read for others, is the fact that although we speak about a Black government and a new Black South Africa, that's not true. What we have is a society caught in the clutch of whiteness. Every single sphere of our country is dominated by whites, including the cultural sphere. So Black people actually have succumbed almost to Black culture, to an economy that is completely held in white hands. The dignity of the Black child and the well-being of a Black child in South Africa today remains as if they are second-rate citizens. And white people, and I don't exempt myself from that class, that category of person, we are treated like squires in a land that we stole from Black people. And that is the uncomfortable truth about South Africa in its current form. All 1994 brought, the so-called freedom in South Africa, is that Black people had to reconcile with their poverty and white people with their privilege. And I speak about the fact that the ANC government, what they've done, and it's such a tragedy, is they've cemented Black poverty in this country and white wealth as if it was a natural phenomenon rather than a monstrosity of apartheid and white supremacy. And that is tragic because in years to come, the children of our children are going to believe that the Black man and woman is by nature poor, and that the white wealth that we see in this country is how it should be. And that is a terrible legacy for the ANC. And it hurts me. I'm not speaking from the perspective of not having once had belief in the ANC government. I used to be an avid ANC supporter. But what I've had to reconcile myself with is that the ANC government is more interested in looking after white interests than the Black majority. And what I argue in my book is that reconciliation in 1994 in this country was a white man's medicine that has harmed Black people, that has put Black liberation way out of sight. And you've seen it yourself. Black people are forced to live in the most congested, almost concentration camps of poverty, where white wealth is excessive. There has not been any shift, or very little shift, in the economic landscape in South Africa since 1994. That economic liberation has not happened in this country. And I used to think that possibly that was just because the ANC government perhaps was slightly naive or trusting. But what I'm beginning to realize or believe is that the ANC government, it was by design that whiteness continued to rule. It's as if the tender of whiteness has continued, because the preservation of white economic power at the expense of Black people still exists. So I refer to this country not as a country, but as a colony, because that is what it is. The country is still in the worship of whiteness, in the curtsy of whiteness. But what is really the situation is that the boot of white supremacy is really strangling people. And I don't believe that Black people have had a breath of freedom or dignity. And that, it's just tragic. I believe that nothing is going to shift in this country using the doctrine of Steve Biko, who was the greatest leader I think we've had in this country, and looking at like a Malcolm X equivalent in the States. But at the moment, Black people are still, I think, too tolerant of whiteness. They still believe that white people would change. And yet we've seen across the world, white oppressors have never shown any mercy. And I ask a very difficult question in my book. I say, do white people in South Africa have a moral conscience? Because if we did, we would have returned stolen land. We wouldn't ignore the patterns of deep poverty that is actually of our making. We walk past that as if it has got nothing to do with us, but it's got everything to do with us. So I think we're in a sad state, actually. That Black unity in South Africa is not in place. Black disunity being the teething gel of white supremacy, and it's deliberate and it's orchestrated by whiteness. But I also speak in my book and about the power of the mind. And I do say that the most problematic thing in South Africa is not that white people occupy the land or the economic sector or the stock exchange, but that whites occupy the minds of Black people. Because whiteness is still held up in this country, perhaps not by the younger generation, and that's where there's some hope, but by most of the people as the state to be. So what we have with many Black people in this country still is that they aspire to be white. And that's a big thing to say, and I may be criticized for that. But that white affirmation is more important than Black consciousness. So to be accepted by a white person still has more equity than to be part of the Black community. And I'm making a sweeping generalization, but that is true in my view. And until that is shifted, it's a consciousness. We are living with a warped consciousness in this country where white people have shown no remorse. So they're stuck in this I am a superior being mentality. But the tragedy is that a lot of Black people still believe that white people are superior. So we've never dealt properly with the mental trauma of colonialism and apartheid on the mind of a Black person. And I've said in many interviews that I just wish that Black people would not expect anything from white people. And they still cling to the possibility that they can work together with white people to achieve a democratic nation. And white people have showed no will. So all the efforts for reconciliation in this country have come from Black people, but they've come to naught. And what's happening in South Africa is that Black people are acting as if they are junior partners in the relationship. They are accommodating themselves in white businesses, in media slots. They may be the faces, but they don't have the power. And until Black people realize that they need to transform rather than find accommodation in a white system, nothing's going to change. There needs to be a sense, Steve Biko, who's, I'm not sure how in the States, if you're so familiar with his work, but he was a Black consciousness leader who was assassinated, as many leaders were in this country when their doctrine threatened white interests. And he said, Black man, you are on your own. And that's exactly correct. And until that is understood, nothing is going to shift unless the consciousness shifts to say this is enough. It's untenable to always be under the tutelage of whiteness, under the supervision of whiteness. And you may have seen a lot of businesses where the whites still owned the company. But there's often a sense amongst Black people of my age that unless there's a white person there, it's not going to succeed. And it's a terrible mentality. So I often think that, the fact that white people think they're superior, it's not going to change. It's something that is a sickness, a terminal illness amongst white people. But when I see some black people actually agreeing with that doctorate, that actually maybe white people are superior, it's an ugly thing to say, but it does exist in South Africa. And there's a beautiful book by an African American called Dr. Tim Burrell, and he says demystifying the myth of black inferiority. And I've read that book many times, and he speaks about how white people for centuries were actually mastered the art of white supremacy. It was they did it so well. But what's happening now in America and beyond is that they've taken that baton and given it to black people, and black people have actually carried on the race and literally finished off the race on behalf of whiteness. And in South Africa, I think there has been a co-option of certain black people into the system, so that white people no longer have to be doing the oppression. They have security guards protecting their interests, and those people are black. And I think any system of white supremacy works on the basis of co-option of black people.
They've always been black people that sold out other black people for a long time, whether it's in slavery, other black people assisting the white supremacists, even all the way up until now. You look in America, we have a black political class that assists white supremacy in doing nothing for black folks at all. They do nothing for us, but they prioritize everybody that white supremacy wants to prioritize.
The lack of speaking of African languages and there's the assertion of cultural richness of African society is still not on the main stage in South Africa at the moment. It's white values, white economy, white man first. In fact, South Africa today, we call it the Rainbow Nation, but it's a white wonderland. It's a wasteland of black economic liberation, but it's a wonderland for whiteness. And that's very sad, because you would assume that white supremacy had died, but all I'm seeing is that it has been supersized and is very much in play.
What is it about the Negro? I mean, every other group that came as an immigrant somehow, not easily, but somehow got around it. Is it just the fact that Negroes are black?
White America must see that no other ethnic group has been a slave on American soil. That is one thing that other immigrant groups haven't had to face. The other thing is that the color became a stigma. American society made the Negro's color a stigma. America freed the slaves in 1863 through the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln, but gave the slaves no land or nothing in reality, and as a matter of fact, to get started on. At the same time, America was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that there was a willingness to give the white peasants from Europe an economic base. And yet it refused to give its black peasants from Africa, who came here involuntarily in chains and had worked free for 244 years, any kind of economic base. And so emancipation for the Negro was really freedom to hunger. It was freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food to eat or land to cultivate, and therefore it was freedom and famine at the same time. And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps, but it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And many Negroes, by the thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression, and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color a stigma and something worthless and degrading.
At the same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. Now, this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
Clean me, wash me with the fragrance of your will. Where I place me, reign over my soul. Clean me, wash me, fill the empty places where I'm broken. Make me whole. Pour sweet all over my soul. Seep into the cracks where sin has dwelled. Singe my heart till I won't no more. Sin has kept my eyes from seeing you. You remind me that despite my faults, I was never out of your sight. No. Clean me, wash me with the fragrance of your will. Place me in where I place me. To do as you, as often as I've tried to replace you with others, I know it's through your grace that you're broken me, so I can see your face. I was never out of your sight, no. Clean me, wash me with the fragrance of your will. And where I reign over my soul.
They're seeking an experience without truth. They want an experience without truth. So are you hearing what I'm saying? So what these churches are teaching people now is to get an experience. You was taught humanism. In other words, man exalted. You got what I'm saying? Man exalted. Everything is about you and what you like. That's why you think the Bible, see, without truth is where you go. Leviticus said, don't have sex with an animal. Don't be having sex with a... Why did God say? I always tell people, why is God saying that? Because people without God would do that. That's what those racists was doing. That when God kicked them out of the land of Canaan, that's what they were doing. What's wrong with the Christian church now? You got a lot of Christians that don't even believe that God created the earth. Because they had to mix their teaching. Because New Age is really centered in Darwinism. New Age religion teaches that we are evolving. That's very constraining them. The law. What is constraining them? How do you destroy a Christian nation? Take the Bible away. They took the Bible out of school. 50 years later, they're killing each other. They took the Christian, remember it should be prayer in school. They took it out 50 years, they're killing each other. Because when you take that away, there's no morality, there's no absolutes. A child need to know thou shalt not. You need to hear that when you're in school. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not kill. Something else that y'all don't know. Back in World War II, the president was given through Congress the right to declare martial law in wartime. You know what that means? Do you know what martial law is? It means the word of the man is it. Whatever he say is law, right? That was never suspended. So we're still legally in wartime. So tomorrow, the president can come out and say, martial law. That means everything will shut down. See, but you think the media is telling you the truth. But I ain't got time. It's hard to preach this because when you talk about this, you dealing with people who are void of truth. So when you tell them the truth, it's like, And then what happens is the stronghold of deception, what they used to, makes it all right. That's how you was able to sin and not be afraid of dying. Talk to me. That's the way you was able to stay in the world and sin and never be afraid of dying. Because when you would think about dying, something would just make it all right. Little drink, little weed, parties, some music. You don't know that was what Satan was using to make you not think about the inevitable. I'm done. I can't get y'all on this. I'm too much. It's too much for y'all. I see y'all popping. Y'all tired. Y'all popping. I've heard people say that. Hell's what you make it. Hell's the whatever life you make it. No, there's a place. There's a place called hell. You know what? It don't even matter if you believe it. You say, well, where is it at then? It's at the end of your life. That's where it is. Everybody want to know where, like they want you to point a picture to hell. It's at the end of your life. That's where it is. When you die, it'll be there. Then they live the life of an unbeliever. And unbelievers have a judgment. That's too harsh for our generation because there is no right and wrong. No, it's no sin. Nobody can judge. That's where it come from. Nobody can judge me but God. The way they kept us in slavery was because they had guns. There was millions of the slaves outnumbered the South. So how can a few people keep millions of people in slavery? They had a gun. But I want y'all to go study instead of just taking CNN and Fox News and these race baiters and Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. Stop taking what they say. These cats ain't nothing but used to distract you from studying for yourself. You got to study for yourself and become a real preacher yourself. You ain't got to have no microphone and be up in no pulpit. Open your mouth and tell people. Now we at the point, listen to me. Remember you heard me saying utter collapse. Utter economic financial collapse it's coming. Utter. When I say utter, I mean every economist, you know it's something when preachers, prophets, and politicians are saying the same thing. Everybody's saying the same thing. It's coming. And they say it's going to be, then you go back and look in the book of Revelation when it's talking about a day's wages for a loaf of bread. That means super hyper inflation. Why? Because in order for us to keep going now, after all these trillions in debt, they turned on the printing machine and never turned it off. But as they print money, what happens if they keep printing money? It's too much money and it devalues the product. So that means the price of stuff goes up. So when China and Russia drop out of the petrodollars, when the American dollar falls, overnight prices are going to go through the roof. But your dollars ain't going to be worth nothing. That's when you better hope you treat people right at that point. You're going to need each other after that. Amen. It's God. God's going to let it happen. Amen. It's coming. And nobody want to hear it. So you know what? Let me go. A little folding of the hands. A little sleep, a little slumber. The Bible says poverty shall come on you like a robber. It's going to come like a robber because nobody wants to hear it. It's too painful. It's too scary to think about. What would happen if you slid that cord and nothing happened? You slid that cord and the gun came out. Get away, Miss Bank. What you doing? What you doing? You know ain't no money in there. You ain't got no money. Get away, Miss Bank. What would you do? What would you do if you went right now to the bank and it was a line all the way around the corner, people trying to get their money, ain't no money? What would you do? 3 days worth of food in the grocery store. What would you do? We're not prepared to live off the land. We don't even own the land we live on. We couldn't plant nothing if we wanted to. Matter of fact, they locked up some people in Detroit for trying to plant food. Why do they want us not to plant? Why are we so helpless? I'm telling you, you got to train your children. Don't let them do what the culture do. I don't care. You ain't going to do it. Keep your, and let me say this before I get, oh God, let me get out of here. Let me say this before I get out of here. Dress your little child like a little girl. Like a little bitty pigtail barrette girl. Do not dress them like a woman. So you got to do everything in your power to keep your daughter looking like a little child. When they walking around with tight stuff on and little Daisy Duke, you ever seen them little girls shorts up to her and they beautiful?
Y'all got to pay attention. It's a whole war going on out here. This war started back in 2019, August the 19th, when they found out the 400 years was up. But they were doing it a little bit before then, right? Because they was trying to indoctrinate fear in you. So if I can indoctrinate fear in you, I can control you. That's the whole point. But they're starting to realize as time starts to grow old that they can't control us. They know that. So it's easier to kill you because they don't want to be ruled by you. But if you wasn't in our land, we wouldn't be having these problems. This is about the birthright, guys. We're going back to Genesis. This is about the birthright. They want their birthright back. But it was never their birthright to give. You guys are not even human. You know when you're talking about 3/4 of a human, they're not human, guys, but y'all sleeping with them. You're sleeping with Nephilim. We know that. They weaponizing it. And they also know that there's money in our neighborhoods. There's going to be an X, guys, over the United States in 2023. The spring of 2023. What that means, it's over. Do your research.
You can find in people of European and Asian ancestry evidence of about 7%, 5 to 10% of your genome is common with that of Neanderthals. And in fact, the Africans who came out from Africa have no evidence of any Neanderthal genes in them. No evidence of admixture. So they're the real pure humans. Homo sapiens. Really, really interesting, and it gives you a lot to think about.